Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for ASPO International to be here in Barcelona, and also we are very pleased with the reception we have got from locally, from people here in Barcelona, and it's so great to know that you are among friends. ASPO is not a very old organization. We've been around for some years, but I think that it's right to say that we have some impact about what things happen in the world already. ASPO is mentioned in government reports, it's mentioned in the press, and peak oil has been part of the daily language in newspapers and around the world. And the term peak oil by itself is once defined by Colin Campbell, and of course this is the way he looked at peak oil. And you should know that the term peak oil refers to the maximum rate of the production of oil in any area under consideration, recognizing that it's a final natural resource subject to depletion. So this is not a theory, as many talking about, it's reality. Peak oil is something that will happen in reality, and you can then you can have some kind of theoretical model to say when will it happen and so on, but peak oil is reality. And if you look back in history, you see that peak oil is once happened. I mean, if in time scale of 4,000 years, it's a very short period that we will have oil around for the human mankind, and this is affecting us very much. If you look back in time when it all started, Colin is saying that it was in December 2000 that these ideas to start ASPO came up when he visited Germany. And he wrote his first newsletter in January 2001. And then I would say that this is an important meeting Colin and I had in October 2001, and that means 7 years from now, because in Valle de Hoop we decided to organize the first ASPO conference in Uppsala. And the conference was in May 2002, and this is some of the pictures from that occasion. The interesting thing is that we had a reporter from Associated Press, Bruce Stanley, and he wrote an article that was posted on Associated Press, and there was something like 20 newspapers around the world that was printing this article. And in this article, the word peak oil was mentioned for the first time in press. So if you look for peak oil in the press before 2002, you find nothing. And if you search on peak oil today, you get millions and millions of hits. So something has happened from May 2002 to today. At that time, and that's also interesting, we had a press release and we said that 87 million barrels per day should probably be the maximum production of oil, and we said it will be sometime around 2010. And we know that the production was in the beginning of this year around 85, 87 million barrels per day, and now it's going down. So I mean, it's quite interesting that even at that time we was quite close to the real numbers as it looks now. One person that came to this conference and was very important, that was Ali Samsam Bakhtiari from Iran. And I was kind of shocked when he arrived, because he said, Kjell, he said, you should know, when I made the decision to go to this conference in Uppsala, I did that because I like to be present when history is written. But I know when I come back to Iran, it might be that I have moved a couple of steps up the list, he said. And I was asking, what kind of list? Well, you know, the list from which they are removing people. I became very nervous, of course, when he said that. But on the other hand, he said, well, the Bakhtiari family is part of producing the oil in Iraq, so if something happened to me, there will be no oil production. But anyway, unfortunately, just after we had our conference last year, we got the news that Ali Samsam Bakhtiari had died. And I will now propose for ASPO in the meeting we have later this week that we should have a Ali Samson Bakhtiari Award. And that award should be to someone that works hard to inform about PICO within countries or around the world. And the first award should be handed out at the next ASPO International Conference. I don't propose a moment of silence because I know that Bakhtiari Ali, he likes us to speak loudly, and we should not be silent. We should just keep on telling the world about PICO. But anyway, we should always remember him as a good friend. And we should also remember that having a person like Ali, you have friends, it doesn't matter from where in the world you are coming. He was a person that clearly demonstrated that we can be friends, doesn't matter what kind of culture we're coming from. So we all remember Ali Samson Bakhtiari for the future. Last year we decided that the ASPO, that had something really been in our European organization, should take the next step. We should be ASPO International. And this is a photo taken from that occasion. And we said that there should be national ASPO organizations, and that is now, during the year, we have created many ASPO organizations in different countries, and more is to come. So this is the World ASPO map for the moment, and you see there is dots all over the world, and next year it will be many, many more, I'm sure of that. So, and this is some of the national ASPO groups that you can find on the web today. This is also an important statement made last year by James Schlesinger, former U.S. Energy Secretary. And he said the following: "And therefore to the peakists I say, you can declare victory." But he also said that we should be gracious in victory, and that means we should not stand up and shout and look, we were right. We should, because we had to work together to say solve the future problems, because there will be problems in the future, no doubt about it. So what we had to build is this crash mat. We should land someplace passing the peak. And it's the crash mat that we all should be working with, and that is building something above ground and take the things we have below ground now and make a sustainable future for all our children and grandchildren. And we should also remember that King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia has said that the oil boom is over and will not return. All of us must get used to a different lifestyle. And that is that we are going to start to discuss here at ASPO 7 in Barcelona. And we think that this will be a great conference. And I'd like to end with this thing. You should know that there is a bet between ASPO and BP. And it was the CEO of BP, Tony Howard, that we were at a meeting in Malaysia, and he said to me, "I bet the oil production 10 years from now will be higher than today's production." And I asked him, "How high is the bet?" And he smiled and he said, "The price of a barrel at that time." And then I said, "I accept the bet." And then he added, "And I hope you understand, I have to make this public." And he looked at me and he was quiet for some time, and then he said, "Okay." So it's an official bet with BP that ASPO has. And I'm sure that this is the best, easiest bet to win for the future. So with that, I would say I look forward to a great international conference here. And it should be about below ground and above ground. And thank you for giving me time to introduce.
Conference, and I would like first of all to thank the organizer from ASPO Spain for all their work in getting everything together, which I know it is a lot of work because I've organized ASPO 5 a couple of years ago in Italy. So we're starting with the first technical session, and I think we are a little bit, we are on schedule actually, so it's all right. You have, all the speakers have about 20 minutes, and please try to keep your presentation within these limits, and we can start Now we have a presentation by Professor Aleklett from Uppsala, and the title will be Peak Oil and the Economic Growth in South Africa.
Good morning. I'm going to talk about peak oil and economical growth in Africa. Being in Spain, we know we are close to Africa. And it's absolutely clear what will happen that will affect us in this side of the Mediterranean. Because if Africa will not prosper and have a future, we will get an even harder pressure for people moving into the west, to the northern part of Europe. And let's see what is needed, maybe, to get an economical growth in Africa. Because I think that is one of the key problems that we have ahead to get Africa blooming, to get Africa on the tracks to a greater future. This is a slide I frequently use when talking about things, and that is Confucius that said 500 years before Christ, he said, study the past to define the future. And I think that is very much what we have to do, to look in the past and from those numbers make conclusions about the future. And if we take this picture to start with and look at the past and define the future, we see that in the past we never ever have had oil as a major source of energy for our daily life. We know that the Romans, they were using slaves. So the petrol that we have in our cars today, at that time was 4 people carrying someone in a chair. So that was the fuel for the transportation at that time. And we also know that if you look into the future, there will never be another period in the future where we will have oil to use. So this is just once in a lifetime thing that is happening. And different groups do different forecasts for the futures, and we're talking about peak oil. This is the way that we look at it from Uppsala University. We have the best case and the worst case, and we say that some place in between here we will have the production of oil. It's of course not easy to make the completely right projection, because we have the below ground and the above ground problems. And if we look now here, what is guiding us for the worst case? Why are we have a plateau and a low production rate? And one of the guiding things is that there is a lot of giant oil fields hanging around that is not in production. And if you look here, for instance, you see the 10 fields that must come in production to get the best case working. And you can read here, it says Kazakhstan, Kuwait, but then we have Iraq, Abu Dhabi, Iraq. So those are the fields that will make the difference between the best case and the worst case. And these are the fields that can be put in production and maybe get something like a 3 million barrels per day in, and that is the difference, I would say, between the forecast we had from ASPO in 2002 and what we see now is that these fields in Iraq is not in production because of the above ground that has happened in Iraq. The thing we use for our living is energy, and this is something you all are familiar with, that we have an increase of use of oil, gas, coal and other things. And I always also like to point out the fact that the solar and wind fraction of the global energy now and during the next 10 years and so on will only be a small fraction of the total global energy output. It might be locally important for some regions, for some cities and so on, but on the big scale, it's fossil fuel that we need to use. So let's see where we have the fuel for the global economy. And the fuel for the global economy is fossil fuel. And you see here that US has most of the fuel, Russia, China, Australia, Saudi Arabia, and so on. And nowhere can you see Africa on this list. And that is, of course, important when we look into the future. You should also notice here that there is only one of the superpowers, if I count as superpowers, United States, China, Russia, and Europe. There is only one of these superpowers that has self-support of coal, oil and natural gas, and don't need to import anything of these things, and that is Russia. And we see that that is important now. For instance, Iceland, that has problems with the economy, as you know, and the Prime Minister of Iceland just recently said, in times as this, we had to look at it, we had to have new friends. And by new friends, he meant Russia, because they can lend him the money. So this is things also that will be important for the future and will affect very much the global production of oil. Well, coal around the world is in a couple of countries, but you don't have them in sub-Saharan Africa. And you also have natural gas, big quantities in in Russia and in the Middle East, but not in Africa. It's in Northern Africa, but that is used for us, by us in Europe mostly. And if we take oil, the same thing. Very little is found in Africa. But before discussing Africa, I like to make a small trip to Daiqing in China. We recently were there, and it's also a way to understand how important oil is for a country, for the economy, and so on. And this is just some graphs, photos I took on the town of Daiqing. When the oil fields were discovered in 1979, there was nothing there. Now they have built a town with 2.6 million people above the oil field. And, you know, the centerpiece with the gas station with the pump in the backyard, I think is a kind of nice view of how it looks there. But the important thing was the oil museum. And if you look at the entrance there, you could read this statement. Petroleum has a compact relationship with a country's political, economical, and military strength. There was no joke about it. It's reality. So if you don't have petroleum, you don't have political and economical and military strength. And that is also something that can explain the situation in Africa. The problem in China now is that they don't have enough of their oil within their own country, so they have a shortfall. And if you look at the Chinese National Petroleum Company, they are now looking around the world, where can we get supply? And you see, of these 65 projects they have, some of them, 60 is in Africa. So Africa is now an interesting nation, or region for China to get oil. And the problem with Africa, I would say, is this graph. It's showing the Human Development Index. And you see what is called Sub-Saharan Africa is the poorest country in the world. They basically don't have anything there when it comes to economy. And if we then take this Human Development Index and plot it against barrels per capita per year used of oil, you see that these countries are not using oil. And that is one explanation why they are that poor. So there is a relationship between how we live as human beings and how much oil we are using. This is maybe even more striking, and that is GDP per capita. And you see the Sub-Saharan Africa, except of South Africa, is not in this category, but the other countries. You see they are all down there in the left corner. They are the poorest country in the world, and they are using very, very little oil for their economy. So China and India and Sub-Saharan Africa in 1980 was about the same level when it comes to GDP per capita. But China and India has prospered, and we can read every day now that China and India is the future, and the economy is growing. But you see, the way to get the economy growing is to use oil and other sources. But oil is easy to compare because all countries in the world is using oil. So it's a one-to-one correlation with the countries that should be developed and the way they use oil. And that is how economy is run today. You can also look in how effectively you are using oil. So that is the oil intensity. That means the barrels per $1,000 GDP. And this is PPP, the way of looking at the national economic growth. So you see here that even though India and China is quite poor, but for the money, what they can buy, they do it, and the amount of oil they're using, they will get out a lot of in their economy. So the oil intensity for these countries are quite high. But then go back to sub-Saharan Africa. Why are they not using oil? Is it the fact that they don't have oil within the region? No, that's not right. This is how we forecast the production of oil in this region. You see it going up, and there will be a peak in the production probably around 2012, 2013, because that is the peak of the deep water production as we see it today. And if we look at the consumption of the sub-Saharan Africa nations, you see they are consuming much less compared to what they could have done, because they are exporting the oil. So that the oil that should be used within the region to get them wealthy, to get some economy running, are not used there. It's exported to us, other nations, so we can have an economy, growing economy. And if we now take the number they have now and say, well, we should have something like a 7% increase in the GDP. You see here the curve that they should follow to get this kind of growth in the economy. They should use more oil. But if we keep on taking out the oil from Africa, as we do now, when they really need it, with this increase in GDP, they will not have it because we have used it. And I would say that Africa has for a long time supported us with labor, with resources and so on, and they have not been allowed to keep it. But the robbery that I think we today do in Africa is the worst that ever have happened, because we're taking away resources that they definitely should need within their own countries in a way that is not acceptable. It should not be done by China, it should not be done by US, it should not be done by Europe, but not by Japan. We should help Africa to use their own oil within their own region. And doing that is one way to get the economy going in these countries. And if the economy will be good, people, I'm sure, would like to stay in Africa and have a good life there. And that is something that we in Europe should benefit very much from, having that situation. So I think it's very important for us to point out the fact that the resources for a growing economy in Africa is within the region, but it's not used in the region. And we should help them to use it to get their economy running. We had to do something different instead of having that oil for our use. So let's look now and see what is the future when it comes to production of oil. And we have made something we call oil intensity scenarios. That means that all countries should be as an effective to use oil for the economy as we see in India and China today. And that means by 2030 we should be down at that point. It's a tough transformation to do that, but let's see what that means. If we should have a growth in the economy, it's said that we need to increase our energy used for transportation and so on, oil, with 2%. And if we take that the OECD countries has a group with 2%, and the non-OECD countries have a 5% increase in GDP, you get these blue and yellow curves. But then we had to see how much is available. So we put our, say, the best case of our scenarios and compare what is needed for the future. And then you can see by 2030, it's an enormous amount of alternative fuels needed for the economy to be running the way it is now. And this is also a challenge that we have for the future that we should be thinking about and working for. That is what I called the crash mat before to be built. And this is a graph I got from Kjell Aleklett showing that we really is flattening out when it comes to oil production. And we can discuss how important this flattening out has been for the increase of the price of oil and with the high price of oil, its role in today's economical crisis. But others, I think, will be discussing that. But we can see here that there is a plateau in the production of oil. And the important things for the future is what the oil industry themselves are saying, that we have a decline in existing production in the existing oil field. And this is a graph from ExxonMobil, and I think it's so great because it says that the decline in existing field is something between 4 and 6% per year, even if we base investments and so in the field. And if we should have an increased demand, as International Energy Agency and other agencies are claiming, we require new production. And I think the color for the new production in economical terms is red. And you know what red numbers are. So the industry themselves are pointing out, yes, we have a red problem in the future. And you take this decline from where we are now, and you see that by 2012, with a 5% decline in existing in today's production, we will be down something like 14 million barrels per day. And the replacement of that decline is the future. What that will happen in the future will define this peak oil in reality. And we see now with today's economy, new projects will not get the capital they need to really get the things running. And that will affect us very much. As I said, the above ground will affect how much will be produced from the underground. And this is, I think, the most important things, the new projects, what will happen with those in the future. And of course, when you're working in a group and make presentations, it might be look that you have done a lot of work, but as a professor you don't do anything. It's your students that do the work. So I like to give credit to my students here, and thank you for listening to this.
Thank you very much, Kjell, and we are well on schedule. We have plenty of time, actually, so you decide whether we would like to go to the next speaker or to ask questions. We have time for questions. If there are any questions, please go ahead. Yes.
Sorry, Lloyd from New Zealand. Kjell, I have a student from Malawi. Malawi has a energy consumption. 95% of it comes from biomass. 2% from oil, 2% from electricity, and 1% gas. Her conclusion was that, in fact, after peak oil, Malawi will fare very well because most of the population won't notice any difference. What I suggest is that any move to increase economic growth due to giving Africa oil will actually be a disadvantage to the country, not an advantage. Thank you.
Well, these discussions is, of course, that people historically has liked to move into the kind of lifestyle that we have in the Western world. And, of course, that is part of the growth in economy and so on. Yes, there are, as you said, people that accepting special type of life is probably living quite well, and it's a different lifestyle we have for the future, as was pointed out before. And I don't say that we need to make this happening, but we can see still there is a lot of people in Africa that is very poor. It's the poorest, and they have a life that is not so good. They are starving, we know that, and so on. It might be spots that are good, but in general, I think we have problems.
Yes, hello. Well, if you think the rich countries are stealing the oil from Africa, do you mean the price is too low?
I mean, the price of oil should not be that much higher than the expenses for producing it. You know, it should be a commodity as other commodities. We also have, of course, the climate change issue that is we should also discuss in respect to this. But when it comes to oil, I don't think that the oil will be a problem for the climate, because the peak oil will solve that part by itself. The price of oil is about how much money should be transferred to one region to another. You know, we see now that a lot of money is transferred to the Middle East because they can sell a lot of oil. A lot of money ends up there, and one can discuss if that money is used in a good way for the world, so to speak. Building artificial islands out there and snow slope in the middle of the desert. I don't think that is maybe the best way to use money for the future, for the economic growth. It should be used where people need it to getting food and getting shelter and good way to living.
Sorry, I don't really understand what you mean. You mean the Africans should keep their oil for the future, or they should stop production?
Yes, they should find plans to use it in their own economy. and not selling it, yes.
Are there parallels to be made with Canada's oil, with Canada being Africa?
Well, Canada has a special, it's special, and of course you're thinking about the tar sand in Canada. And there we have really an environmental issue to discuss. You're putting in a lot of money to get an industry working that should bring something out from the ground and energy that should be used. The question is if one should not put that kind of money into an industry of renewable energy instead and get because that is needed for the future. The tar sand, I think, from an environmental point of view, should be stay where it is now in the ground.
I would like myself to thank Kjell Aleklett for bringing this subject to our attention, because I think this subject of poor countries' exploitation and effects on poor countries of peak oil had not been brought before in an ASPO conference. And of course, we don't know how things will be, because we can say that poor countries may be affected more by peak oil because their economies are more fragile. On the other hand, they use less oil, so maybe they would be less vulnerable. We don't know. It's one of the great problems that we are facing. So thank you very much, Kjell. A little clapping our hands for our speaker.